Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we are looking at Will, Scion of Peace. So Will, Scion of Peace is a 3-mana Azorius commander, 2/4 with Vigilance, tap. Spells you cast this turn that are white and or blue cost X less to cast, where X is the amount of life you gain this turn, activate only as a sorcery. So unlike Rowan, Scion of War, which is the Rakdos version of Will, Rowan's ability applies based on the amount of life you lost, which is much easier to do rather than gaining life. So Will has a higher hurdle to clear. Also, Black and Red typically have easier ways of winning the game off of the cost reduction with cards like Exsanguinate and whatnot, whereas Blue-White doesn't really have the same effect. So it is a hurdle in order to get the Will deck going, but the main things we're going to want are cheap cards that gain a bunch of life to reduce the costs of our blue and white spells. Then we'll want big payoff blue and white spells that have their costs reduced in order to win the game. And we probably want a way to give Will haste so we can activate him immediately, as well as potentially ways of untapping him, since one problem with Will is that the tap effect only applies based on the amount of life you already gained before you tapped him. If you tap Will and then chain a bunch of spells together and then cast more life gain spells, the cost reduction effect does not apply based on new life gain spells, only ones that you already had before you tapped Will. So the first thing is that we're obviously going to want a bunch of cheap life gains. So we've got Cathedral Sanctifier, ETB gain 3, Chaplain's Blessing gain 5, Light of Hope gain 4. It also has some other modes, but mainly gain 4. Lucky Offering, destroy target artifact with mana value 3 or less and gain 3. Navigator's Compass, this is a mana fixer that gains 3 on ETB. Wrist for the Wary gains 4, but if you have had a land enter the battlefield, so landfall, you gain 8 instead. Reward the Faithful. Any number of target players each gains life equal to the highest converted mana cost among permanents you control. So as long as you have Will in play, it's at minimum 3, and if you have something more expensive, it's more than that. Search Warrant. Target player reveals their hand. You gain life equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. So this obviously depends on your opponents having cards in hand, although if you cast this early enough, it should be good enough. Serra Ascendant. Due to EDH, you'll start with 40 life, meaning Serra Ascendant is a 5/5 flying lifelinker, which means if you play this on turn 1, you then get to bash in for 6 lifelink and gain 6. You've got Soothing Balm, 2 mana, gain 5. Sunbeam Spellbomb, 1 and then 1 more to sack, gain 5. White Sun's Passage, 2 mana to gain 5. And Zurin Orb, sack a land, you gain 2, and it costs 0. So obviously sacking a land is a pretty steep cost to do this, so you're only going to want to do this if you're ready to go off. Then we've got a bunch of mana ramp, typical mana rocks along with Smothering Tithe. Some counter spells to make sure that Will doesn't get killed or countered. And then we've got a bunch of card draw effects. So Echo of Eons, Esper Sentinel, Frantic Search, Lorien Revealed, Mystic Remora, Pour Over the Pages, Recurring Insight, Rhystic Study, The Ring, Time Reversal, Time Spiral, Time Twister, Windfall. And notably, these spells that draw a ton of cards are really good when you're reducing their cost with Will. Also, anything that untaps lands like Pour Over the Pages and Frantic Search and Time Spiral are mana positive with Will, because you activate Will, you reduce their costs. They only cost 1 to 2 mana, and then you untap as many or more lands than it costs to even tap them in the first place. You got a little bit of fast mana with Jeweled Lotus and Lotus Petal. And then here's your payoffs. You've got Omniscience and one with the Multiverse. So unfortunately, neither of these cards just actually outright win the game on their own, but they do allow you to just cheat these into play by reducing their costs by like 6 or 7 with Will, and then just getting these. And then for Omniscience, all of your spells are free after that. And with one with the Multiverse, not all of your spells are free, but at least one of them is. And this can be a pretty good value engine on its own. Next, and also one with the Multiverse is just really good with Will, reducing the costs of things. Also Cyclonic Rift, which once again is great when you reduce the cost of Overload to 1. You've got some hasting or untapping effects. So Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, and 1,000-Year Elixir all allow you to tap Will immediately. Renegade Doppelganger also does kind of a similar thing, where because it can become a clone of Will, if you already have the Renegade Doppelganger in play, you can play Will, Legend Rule them, so that the Renegade Doppelganger becomes a copy of Will, and then you sack the new Will, and then this Renegade Doppelganger is now a Will that can tap immediately. A little bit of protection effects with Silence and Teferi, so that our opponent can't counter our Will or stop anything else that we're doing. A little bit of tutoring with Enlightened Tutor, Mystical Tutor, Solve the Equation, and Spellseeker. And then we've got Chakran Retriever along with 1,000-Year Elixir as ways of untapping Will in case we need to untap him to Like maybe we do one life gain spell, cast some spells, and then we find another life gain spell. We can untap them to go again. And then finally, we find our combo pieces. So these are the ways that we're actually going to win the game. So we do have the Dramatic Scepter combo to gain infinite mana when we have enough mana rocks that we can have at least 3 mana and go positive. We've got Palinchron, because Palinchron with the cost reduced only costs 2 mana to cast and then 4 mana to pick back up. So as long as we have 7 mana total worth of lands, we can cast Palinchron and recast it over and over and over, floating 1 mana each time. We also have, of course, Tidespout Tyrant and Hullbreaker Horror, which can go infinite using certain mana rocks. So like if we have, let's say, Mana Crypt and Soul Ring, or Soul Ring and Mox Opal, or Mox Amber and Mox Opal, we can keep looping them back and forth with the Hullbreaker / Tidespout Tyrant. You cast one, tap it for mana, bounce the other one, cast the other one, bounce the first one, tap the new one for mana, etc. We get infinite mana. Or if we have another way of just casting spells over and over like Palinchron, we can do that and bounce our opponent's entire board with Tidespout Tyrant. We similarly have Peregrine Drake in here, although this does not bounce itself, but it can bounce based on like Tidespout, for example. And we have Displacer Kitten. So Displacer Kitten, whenever we cast a spell, can blink one of our permanents, one of our non-creature permanents specifically, and this can combine with, for example, Teferi. So if we have Displacer Kitten, Teferi, and an artifact rock that costs 0, like let's say Mox Amber, right? You go Mox Amber, tap for a color, you play anything, maybe the Mox Amber itself. The Displacer Kitten triggers and blinks Teferi. Teferi picks up the Mox Amber. We recast the Mox Amber, which triggers the Kitten, which blinks the Teferi, which makes us have a new Teferi. The Amber enters the field. We tap the Amber for blue or white. We bounce the Amber with the new Teferi. It comes back to our hand. We cast it. We trigger the Displacer Kitten, etc. And we draw our entire deck, and we gain infinite mana. But it can also just combine with other things in our deck if we want to, like just blinking our mana rocks whenever we cast other spells. So let's say we reduce the costs of things with Will, and then we're just casting other spells. Then the Displacer Kitten on casting those spells can trigger and blink our mana rocks to get more mana out of that and potentially just keep going so that these spells become basically free instead of just cost reduced. So lots of different things that we can do there. The main win cons are going to be generating infinite mana / drawing our entire deck, and then eventually setting up a combo of winning with primarily Tidespout Tyrant, bouncing our opponent's entire board. So we technically don't have a way to just instantly win the game, but we do have a way to effectively win the game. And if you do want a way to instantly win the game, you could just put Thassa's Oracle or Aetherflux Reservoir or something in this deck, like a way to actually just win the game on the spot. But as is, these cards, specifically Tidespout Tyrant, will usually just win the game on their own. Then for lands, we have pretty typical blue and white lands. Cavernous Souls to make Will uncounterable. We've got Hall of the Bandit Lord to give Will haste. Inventor's Fair to tutor up artifacts. Manamo to untap legends, which is relevant for both Will and the One Ring. Odawara Mystic Sanctuary. 1 Radiant Fountain. This is in here just as a land source to gain life. We could also play Kabira Crossroads or other various lands that gain life, but those lands all enter tapped. Glimmer Post doesn't enter tapped, but it only gains us 1 life, whereas Radiant is 2. I'm not even sure how good this is to begin with, but I think it's fine as a one of. And then that is basically the deck, yeah. So play a bunch of cheap life gain, reduce the cost of big spells with Will, Scion of Peace, cast a bunch of big spells, eventually find a combo to win the game. And that is the Will, Scion of Peace deck.